نقض وخیم حقوق بشر در ایران، اعدام و جنایت علیه بشریت. کنفرانس مطبوعاتی دفتر نمایندگی شورای ملی مقاومت ایران در انگلستان.
فراخوان به اقدام فوری بین المللی برای نجات جان زندانیان سیاسی. حسابرسی از عاملان قتل عام زندانیان سیاسی در سال 67 و بازگرداندن تحریم‌های بین المللی علیه رژیم آخوندی.
سخنان دکتر متیو آفورد و استیو مکیب، نمایندگان مجلس عوام انگلستان، کیموساسی، وزیر پیشین تجارت فنلاند، دکتر آلخوبیدال کوادراس، رئیس کمیته بین المللی در جستجوی عدالت، طاهر بومدرا، رئیس پیشین حقوق بشر یونامی و نماینده دبیرکل برای اشرف، حسین عابدینی، معاون نمایندگی شورای ملی مقاومت در انگلستان.
The deteriorating human rights situation in Iran. We all know that it has reached a crisis point, and it's requiring a united international response and United Nations intervention. Navid Afkari, 27-year-old young athlete who was brutally and secretly executed by the regime on Saturday, 12th of September. At present, dozens of other political prisoners are on death row. In the second picture, you saw the picture of 32-year-old Mustafa Salehi, who was arrested during the popular uprising in 2017 and imprisoned until his execution. As you could see, his son and daughter were seen in the picture standing beside Mustafa's poster after his execution. In this picture, in the next picture, we saw another prisoner, Haydar Qurbani, a Kurdish prisoner imprisoned in Sanandaj in the Iranian Kurdistan, and the Iranian regime Supreme Court has just endorsed his death sentence. The case has now been referred to the city of Sanandaj prosecutor office for the execution to take place. Haydar Qurbani was arrested in 2016. There are also 7 Sunni prisoners. The death sentences were upheld on September 10, 2020. And we all know that these are the prisoners who were arrested during different nationwide protests. In November 2019, uprising, 1,500 people were brutally killed and 12,000 were arrested. In today's conference, our speakers will elaborate on other appalling crimes by the regime, including the destruction of mass graves in the southern city of Ahvaz, and also the brutal attack on female PMOI prisoners in Karchak prison. These cases mentioned today all is tantamount to severe violation of the international human rights law and United Nations conventions put in place by the international community with the purpose of preventing these type of heinous human rights violations. Yet the international community has failed the people of Iran and allowed the regime to enjoy impunity for all these years by refusing to hold the regime's officials accountable according to the above mentioned laws. The National Council of Resistance of Iran and that the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran released the names of 56 other martyrs of the nationwide uprising of the Iranian people in November 2019. 20 of these new names are from the city of Mahshar in Iranian Khuzestan province, who were brutally massacred mainly in the cane breaks of the city by the suppressive forces of the regime. The names of 811 victims of the uprising have been released. And as you know, the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, has announced on December 15, 2019, that the number of victims in November is more than 1,500. These are the victims from the city of Mahshar. I think that clearly shows the extent of this brutal crime against humanity. I will reiterate the NCRI's previous warnings that the international community's silence at this juncture in Iran will risk another wave of secret executions in the Iranian prisons. Contrary to the regime's calculations, the execution of Navid did not incite fear, as the mullahs expect, increased the people's anger and their determination to overthrow the regime in its entirety. The international community must stand with the people of Iran in their struggle to secure fundamental and inalienable freedoms and rights. They can do so, as Mrs. Mariam Rajavi said in her message to a conference by the British parliamentarians and prominent jurists on 10th of September, that the UN Security Council must address the terrible situation of human rights in Iran.
I believe that ever since the massacre in 1988, the Iranian regime has been emboldened. They've been emboldened to not only continue to implement draconian measures upon their people, but they've also engaged in terrorism and supporting terrorism, not only within their country, but also not only on the borders, but also in other countries around the world, be that from places as far away as South America to closer to home in many respects for people of Iranian heritage, for those who have been involved in the issue in Syria, Lebanon, and indeed in Yemen. Iran has been behind much of this. A lot of the criticism that I have about the UK government stems from the British government's decision to go ahead with a joint plan of action. I believe that was a great mistake. Firstly, it did not tie in human rights of the people of Iran, and that has enabled them to continue with their crackdowns against dissidents and to behave in a fashion that certainly we do not accept in the West, and indeed many other parts of the Middle East do not accept as well. It also allowed them to free up resources. These resources consisted of men, and many of them were men who were able to go overseas and to fight in conflicts and civil wars, such as Syria, such as Yemen, and indeed to influence governments such as Lebanon. It also freed up the sanctions, which allowed millions of dollars to be poured overseas, much of it controlled by the IRGC, who were not only funding conflicts, but also pushing their own narrow political ideology in other countries. It also emboldened many of the individuals in the IRGC to enrich themselves, and they were able to do that by the freeing up of sanctions. So in the last couple of months, we've seen since November more and more actions taken against the people of Iran as they demonstrate against the regime. We've seen most recently executions continue, something that I have already called upon the British government to act upon. Iran seems to be emboldened to carry on their executions of people, some of them women and children, in an unacceptable and inhumane way that we cannot continue to accept. I believe as a result of the actions in the last couple of weeks, we should put pressure upon the government, and we should not restrict that, we should not remove that arms embargo. We should not allow them to buy arms that can be used against their people, but we should not allow the people of Iran to be abused by their country, to be abused by their regime, and to be ignored by the international community. We know the regime is resorting to more and more suppression of its people. The executions and torture are clear signs that it's desperately clinging to power, and that is of great concern. The most recent execution of Navid Afkari was a great blow for the country through one of its leading sportsmen being executed by the regime. But I would like to see the UK government taking steps with other governments, the EU, the American government, to actually re-put these sanctions back upon Iran. I've already mentioned the arms embargo, and I would like that to remain intact. It's a disgrace to allow the regime to be given the opportunity to purchase weapons or to freely provide those very same weapons to the terrorist proxies. We should also subject Iran so that they stop executions. And certainly we want to see them stopping any kind of imprisonment of political prisoners or even calls for reimposing on UN sanctions to achieve this. So we must take any means necessary to achieve these demands. I welcome the recent Amnesty International report. I look forward to the government responding to it as I've asked them to do so. We should certainly seek that the Iranian ambassador comes to the British government and sets out why it's going down this route. It's not acceptable, it's gone on too long, and it really must stop. Thank you.
The kind of brutal and secret execution of Navid Afkari just kind of gives us a sign of what is actually beginning to happen in Iran at the moment. And there must now be fears for dozens of political prisoners on death row who will be wondering if the same fate awaits them. But strangely enough, as sometimes happens when people are faced with a brutal regime, instead of it cowing people, it seems to actually be having the reverse effect. So I was really surprised to see that prisoners in different prisons all over Iran have actually been writing letters of condemnation to the authorities following the execution of Navid. And these are people doing this knowing fine well that their actions may well hasten their own execution. So if the object of what the Iranian authorities are doing at the moment is to cow the population, then it would appear that it's actually not having the desired effect. I think it's obvious that the regime has taken a decision to turn its face against the international community. And right now, it's absolutely deaf to the views of the wider world. And I guess as long as the authorities in Iran feel they can act with impunity, then the situation won't improve. The problems will continue. They'll get worse. They have no respect for the normal rule of law and no respect for the conventions of normal diplomacy. So, I mean, I guess I want to say that it's not enough to condemn their actions. It's not enough to condemn what's happening in Iran. We actually need to have meaningful sanctions now. It's time to toughen up the response. And I certainly agree with Matthew and others that we should argue that the arms embargo, which is due to expire in October, needs to be reinforced. If we give them further access to more, a greater range of weapons, more weapons, then we know what will happen. It will only inflame tensions in the region, and it will reinforce Iran's support for the various proxy wars they've been encouraging for a number of years now. So if we want the Middle East to be on a permanent war footing, if we want the various proxy wars that are happening throughout the region to continue, and with the slaughter and the mayhem that involves, then the way to do that is to make it easy for Iran to get their hands on more weapons, which they'll duly pass on. It seems to me that's inevitable. And other things I think have gone on too long. I think it is time for the UN to demand that there must be a thorough investigation of what happened during the 88 massacre. You cannot just kill people with impunity and expect to get away with it. We need a proper UN-led international investigation, and we need those responsible brought to justice. And as regards the current situation, we've got to demand that an international team be allowed to visit the prisons in Iran and make a proper assessment of the condition of those being detained there at the present time. And if Iran and the Iranian authorities won't show a willingness to engage in a more positive way with the concerns that people are now expressing, then it must be time to consider more serious consequences. If the regime continues to refuse to accept normal, conventional standards of behaviour, then we have to ask what's the value of persisting with them. And that must include expelling Iranian diplomats from this country, up to and including the ambassador. And if we have to continue on that route, it will have to include closing the embassy and ending diplomatic relations. Now, no country takes these decisions lightly.